Ethan Cole had always believed silence was his father's favorite language. Growing up, he learned to read it, the way Robert's jaw tightened when Ethan mentioned his art, or how his eyes drifted away whenever the word love came up in a way that didn't fit the picture of what a son was supposed to be. To Robert, life had a structure, a spine of discipline that kept everything in place. Ethan, with his sketchbooks and restless heart, seemed like a misplaced page in that order. Even now, at 25, Ethan still carried that quiet weight of being misunderstood. The small town of Brookfield hadn't changed much since his teenage years. The same neat lawns, the same cautious smiles. He'd moved into a small apartment downtown after graduating from art school, hoping distance might finally give both him and his father room to breathe. But it hadn't. Robert's presence lingered, in his tone during their phone calls, in the way Ethan still hesitated before saying anything too personal. One late afternoon, Ethan visited his parents' house for dinner. Claire, his mother, greeted him with her warm, habitual smile, the kind that tried to smooth over whatever tension waited behind closed doors. Robert was already seated at the table, still in his principal's uniform, pressed shirt, tie knotted just so, authority hanging on him like a second skin. "How's work?" Robert asked without looking up. "It's good," Ethan said softly. "I've been doing more freelance projects lately." "Some clients from New York, that's nice," his father interrupted, slicing into his meat. "But you should think about something stable. Something that lasts." Ethan smiled thinly. "Art lasts, Dad." Robert's knife paused mid-cut, but he said nothing. The clinking of silverware filled the silence that followed. Claire's gentle hum of approval toward Ethan's artwork couldn't mask the distance stretching between father and son. They were two people who loved each other but never managed to speak the same emotional language. After dinner, Ethan lingered by the porch while his father read the newspaper. The air smelled faintly of rain, heavy and expectant. "I should go," Ethan said finally. Robert looked up, his expression unreadable. "Drive safe." It was their version of goodbye, brief, careful, and incomplete. Later that night, Ethan sat by his apartment window, his laptop open, the glow painting his tired face in soft blue. It was then he saw a new message notification flash across his screen. The name was unfamiliar. "Daniel Hayes, your art has a heartbeat," the message read. "Most people paint what they see. You paint what you feel." Ethan hesitated, curious. He clicked on Daniel's profile, minimal, discreet, the kind of person who didn't say much about himself but seemed to understand too much about others. Their first conversation was short, thoughtful, and strangely grounding. Daniel had a voice, even through text, that carried a kind of calm Ethan hadn't known in years. Over the next few weeks, their exchanges grew into long midnight conversations. Daniel asked questions that no one else ever did, not about technique or career, but about the why behind Ethan's art. "When you paint," Daniel once said, "you're not running from the world. You're just trying to make it honest again." It was a line that stayed with Ethan for days. There was something familiar about Daniel's phrasing, his mix of warmth and restraint. It reminded him, in an odd, uneasy way, of his father when he wasn't wearing his armor of authority. But Ethan brushed the thought aside. Daniel was different. He was someone who listened, someone who didn't flinch at softness. One Saturday evening, they finally met in person. A quiet cafe near the edge of town, far from curious eyes. Daniel was older than Ethan expected, early 30s, maybe mid-30s, with a presence that drew attention without trying. His smile was slow, deliberate, and when he spoke, his tone carried a familiar steadiness that made Ethan's pulse falter for reasons he couldn't name. Their conversations in person were effortless, flowing like a melody both had memorized without realizing it. Daniel asked about Ethan's family. Ethan hesitated but answered honestly. "My dad and I, we see the world differently." Daniel nodded, thoughtful. "Fathers can be complicated men. Sometimes they mistake fear for love." The words landed heavier than expected. Ethan looked at him closely. "That's exactly what it feels like." "Then you understand him more than you think," Daniel said gently. They spent hours talking about everything and nothing, art, loneliness, the strange ache of being misunderstood. When Daniel reached across the table and brushed Ethan's hand, it felt both thrilling and terrifying. Not because of what it meant, but because it felt real in a way that demanded honesty. Weeks turned into months. Their bond deepened, though Daniel remained guarded. He never spoke much about his past or where he lived. His life seemed folded into shadows, private, but not dishonest, or so Ethan told himself. The secrecy, he believed, was just part of who Daniel was. One evening, as autumn crept in, Daniel showed up at Ethan's apartment unannounced. He looked tense, distracted, his usual composure frayed. "Rough day?" Ethan asked, closing his sketchbook. "Something like that," Daniel murmured, looking away. "Sometimes, I wish I could just disappear from everything I've built." Ethan touched his arm lightly. "Then stay here. Just for a while." Daniel smiled, grateful but distant, like someone carrying a truth he couldn't yet confess. As they sat together in silence, Ethan caught himself studying the way Daniel's brow furrowed when he thought deeply, the same way his father's did when lost in reflection. The resemblance was fleeting, almost absurd, but it left a strange chill crawling through his chest. Later that night, when Daniel left, Ethan sat in the quiet of his apartment, unable to shake the sense of something unspoken hovering between them. He opened his phone to reread old messages, scrolling through their early exchanges until one line caught his attention again, the one Daniel had written weeks ago: "When you paint, you're not running from the world. You're just trying to make it honest again." He remembered hearing almost the same sentence once before, years ago, from his father, a rare moment of tenderness after finding Ethan sketching under the kitchen light at midnight. Ethan stared at the message, his stomach tightening. Maybe it was coincidence. Maybe he was imagining things. But the echo of familiarity refused to fade. Outside, the rain began to fall, steady and unrelenting. The world beyond his window blurred into shifting shapes, reflections without edges. Inside, his thoughts did the same, forming questions he wasn't ready to ask. When Daniel's next message appeared on his screen, Ethan's breath caught. The words were simple, kind, and yet eerily familiar, something his father had once said almost word for word: "Sometimes people only see what they're ready to understand." Ethan's fingers hovered above the keyboard, frozen. For the first time since their connection began, the warmth of Daniel's voice in his head was replaced by unease. Something deep inside him stirred, confusion, fear, and a flicker of recognition he wished he could ignore. The silence in his apartment grew heavier than before, pressing against him from every direction. He didn't reply. Not yet that he needed to understand what exactly he was feeling, and why Daniel's words sounded like ghosts from a life he thought he'd left behind. And somewhere between that thought and the echo of rain, a quiet dread began to take root. The party had settled into its rhythm, music pulsing through the walls, the scent of mixed drinks and perfume lingering in the air. Ethan moved through the room cautiously, a quiet observer among clusters of laughter and movement. It wasn't that he didn't belong, he just didn't know how to. The house, dimly lit and alive with chatter, felt like a stage where everyone else knew their lines. Liam was everywhere at once, greeting guests, pouring drinks, laughing in that effortless way that made people gravitate toward him. Yet every few minutes, his gaze would find Ethan's across the room, a fleeting glance that said more than words could. Each time it happened, Ethan's heart kicked against his ribs, and he had to look away before anyone noticed. Grace Miller, one of the guests, drifted toward him with a kind smile. She was the type of person who made conversation easy, even when Ethan had nothing to say. "You're Noah's brother, right?" she asked, balancing a glass in her hand. "Yeah," he said, managing a polite smile. "Ethan. I've heard about you," she replied. "Didn't expect to see you here." "Neither did I," he said, which made her laugh. Her laughter faded as her eyes flicked toward Liam, who was leaning against the counter, his focus momentarily fixed on them. "Liam's been keeping an eye on you," Grace said quietly, a teasing lilt in her tone. "You too close?" Ethan froze. "Not really," he said quickly. "He's just my brother's friend." Grace smiled knowingly. "Sure," she said, before turning toward the crowd, her presence vanishing as easily as it had appeared. Ethan felt heat rise to his face. He turned toward the table, pretending to study the lineup of drinks, but his mind wasn't on any of them. When he glanced up again, Liam was walking toward him, slowly, deliberately, like he'd been waiting for a moment to break free from the noise. "Everything okay?" Liam asked when he reached him. "Yeah," Ethan said, though his voice came out thinner than he meant it to. "Just, taking it in." Liam leaned close enough for his words to cut through the music. "It's a lot, I know. You don't seem like the kind of guy who likes crowds." "I don't," Ethan admitted. "But you invited me, so you came anyway," Liam finished, his tone low, almost thoughtful. "I'm glad you did." The way he said it wasn't casual. There was weight in the words, something careful yet intentional. Ethan looked at him, uncertain whether to read into it. But Liam didn't look away. Someone turned up the volume, and the moment broke. Liam gestured toward the balcony. "Too loud in here. Want to get some air?" Ethan hesitated but followed. Outside, the music was muffled, replaced by the soft hum of the night. The air was cool, carrying the faint scent of rain. The backyard lights flickered softly, painting the space in muted gold. Liam leaned against the railing, staring into the dark yard. "You ever notice how quiet it gets when people go inside?" he said. Ethan joined him, their shoulders almost touching. "I like the quiet," he said. "I figured," Liam replied with a small smile. "You don't talk much, but when you do, you actually mean it." Ethan gave a nervous laugh. "I guess that's one way to put it." There was a long pause. The silence between them felt alive, neither comfortable nor awkward, just charged with something unspoken. Liam looked at him again, and in that glance, Ethan saw an honesty that unsettled him. "You remind me of how I used to be," Liam said softly. "Before I learned how to pretend." Ethan frowned slightly. "Pretend?" "Yeah," Liam said, exhaling. "Like everything's fine. Like I've got it all figured out. People like your brother, they live on the surface. Everything's loud, visible, easy. But people like you," he looked at Ethan, his gaze steady. "You feel everything too much. You hide it better, though." Ethan didn't know what to say. The truth of it hit too close. "Maybe," he managed. "Or maybe I'm just better at pretending too." Liam smiled faintly. "Maybe." They stood there for a long moment, the sounds of laughter drifting from inside. Ethan's thoughts tangled between gratitude and confusion. He didn't understand why Liam was saying these things, or what it meant. But he felt seen, dangerously seen, in a way that made it hard to breathe. When Liam spoke again, his voice was quieter. "Noah's lucky, you know. Having someone who actually cares." Ethan turned toward him. "He's my brother." "Still," Liam said. "You don't get to choose who matters to you." The words hung there, heavy. Ethan's pulse quickened. He didn't know whether Liam meant Noah or someone else entirely. From inside, Grace called Liam's name, pulling him back. He looked toward the sound, then back at Ethan. "Stay out here for a bit if you want," he said softly. "You don't have to play along with the noise." Ethan nodded, but his mind was elsewhere. When Liam disappeared inside, he stayed by the railing, watching the faint glow of the city beyond the trees. That he replayed every word in his head, the way Liam's tone had shifted, the look in his eyes when he said "you don't get to choose who matters." That it was reckless to think there was more behind it. Reckless, but tempting. When Ethan finally went back inside, the crowd had thinned. The music had softened to a low rhythm. Liam was talking to a few guests near the kitchen, but his eyes flicked up as soon as Ethan entered. That same almost smile touched his lips, brief and unreadable. Ethan found a spot near the edge of the room, nursing a half-empty glass. He told himself to leave, to slip out before things got complicated. But he stayed. Later, as the clock edged toward midnight, Liam appeared beside him again, the room now nearly empty. "Everyone's heading out," he said, voice low. "Guess the night's winding down." "Yeah," Ethan said, his tone unreadable. Liam leaned closer, enough that Ethan could feel the warmth of his breath. "You ever think some nights shouldn't end yet?" Ethan met his gaze. "What do you mean?" Liam's expression softened. "Just that some moments feel unfinished." Ethan didn't reply, but his silence said enough. The space between them felt fragile, like one wrong word could shatter it. Then Grace reappeared by the door, waving goodbye. "Good night, Liam," she called. "See you soon." Liam smiled back, then looked at Ethan once more. "You should go before it gets too late," he said, though his tone contradicted the words. Ethan hesitated. "Yeah. Maybe I should." He started toward the door, then stopped. "Thanks for inviting me." Liam's voice followed him, quiet and steady. "Anytime, Ethan." Outside, the cool night wrapped around him. The street was still, the house behind him glowing softly through the windows. He could still hear the faint echo of laughter, the fading music, the unspoken words hanging in the air. That he walked home slowly, his mind restless, his chest tight with something he didn't dare name. The night had ended, but its weight lingered, warm, unsettling, and entirely alive. When he reached his porch, he paused, glancing back down the street toward where the lights of Liam's house shimmered faintly through the dark. He knew he wouldn't sleep. He also knew that whatever had started tonight wasn't over. Not yet. The following morning began like any other, but everything felt slightly off, like the world had shifted a few inches to the left while I wasn't looking. I went through the motions: coffee, emails, meetings, polite small talk. But every time Marcus walked past my desk, the air tightened around me. He seemed composed, maybe even more so than usual, but I noticed the small tells, the brief pauses before he spoke, the way his fingers drummed softly against the folder he held. It wasn't guilt, exactly. It was awareness. The same awareness that now lived between us, silent and alive. By afternoon, I had convinced myself it would fade. It had to. We hadn't crossed any visible lines, and people forget fleeting moments when they want to. I was sure Marcus wanted to, but then, as I packed my bag that evening, I heard his voice. "Ethan, a minute." He stood by his office door, expression calm but eyes shadowed. I followed him in, closing the door behind me. The soft click sounded louder than it should have. He didn't sit behind his desk this time. Instead, he leaned against it, arms folded. "I told Liam you helped me home that night," he said evenly. I thought he should know. My stomach tightened. "That's good. You didn't have to, but honesty's always best." He nodded. "Yeah." He asked what we talked about. I told him I barely remembered. Something inside me stung at that, though I wasn't sure why. "Maybe because I remembered every word," Marcus continued quietly. "He said he was glad I had someone to count on at work. Said you must be a good person." I didn't know what to say, so I just nodded. The silence stretched between us, heavy but not uncomfortable, just real. He sighed. "I've been thinking a lot about that night, Ethan. About what I said. I was drunk, but not so drunk I didn't mean some of it." I met his gaze. "You don't have to explain. It's not my place to." "I do," he interrupted gently. "Because it wasn't fair to you." He ran a hand through his hair, exhaling slowly. "You didn't ask for any of that. And I don't want you carrying it like a secret. You've done nothing wrong." His voice was calm, but I could feel the weight behind it, the struggle to keep emotion contained. "I wasn't hurt by it," I said quietly. "If anything, I understood." His eyes softened. "That's exactly what makes it harder." We stood there for a long moment, the low hum of the air conditioner filling the silence. He looked tired again, the same kind of tired I'd seen when he'd sat on his couch, talking about pretending through life. "I'm trying to fix things," he said finally. "With Liam. We've been distant. I don't want to lose him." The words landed with quiet finality. I nodded, throat tight. "You shouldn't. He sounds like a good man." "He is," Marcus said softly. "And I've been a coward." I wanted to tell him he wasn't, but maybe he was right. We all were, sometimes. Afraid to ruin what we built, even when it stopped feeling like home. "Marcus," I said, my voice steady, "you don't owe me an apology for what you felt. People can't always control what they feel. Only what they do with it. He looked at me for a long time, expression unreadable. You're wiser than you should be at your age. I smiled faintly. I've had good teachers. A flicker of something, gratitude, sorrow, maybe both, crossed his face. Ethan, I think it'd be best if we kept things simpler between us. Professional. At least for a while. I'd expected it. Still, hearing it made something inside me sink, slow and heavy. That makes sense. He nodded. You're good at your job. I don't want to make it harder for either of us. The conversation ended there, but his tone lingered in my chest long after I left his office. Days passed quietly. He kept his word, professional, polite, distant. I did the same. We spoke only when necessary. But sometimes I'd catch him looking out his office window during late hours, his expression somewhere far away. I never asked what he was thinking. Some silences are better left untouched. A week later, I found a note on my desk. His handwriting, precise, slanted, confident. Thank you for being there when I wasn't myself. You reminded me of something I'd forgotten, that honesty doesn't always destroy, it sometimes saves. Take care of yourself, Ethan. No signature, but it didn't need one. That night, I stayed late at the office. The city lights glimmered outside, reflections rippling across the rain-slicked windows. For a moment, I imagined Marcus walking through the door again, tie loosened, asking if I ever got tired of being the reliable one. But the image dissolved as quickly as it came. Maybe that was the lesson, we're all temporary chapters in someone else's story. Sometimes we leave a mark, sometimes just a page turned too quietly to notice. When I finally shut down my computer and stepped outside, the rain had started again, soft and steady, like the night it all began. I walked without an umbrella, letting the water soak through my shirt. The air smelled of wet asphalt and something bittersweet I couldn't name. That I thought about Marcus and Liam, how they might be talking right now, maybe rebuilding what had cracked. I hoped they were. Despite everything, I wanted him to be happy. Somewhere deep down, I also knew I'd miss him, not the boss, not the man who apologized, but the version of him that existed only in those quiet, suspended moments. The one who had let himself be seen. By the time I reached my apartment, the rain had slowed. I poured a glass of water, stood by the window, and watched the city blur through streaks of moisture. It felt almost poetic. The same rain that had begun this strange, unspoken chapter was now washing it away. Maybe that was what closure really was, not forgetting, but learning to stop rewriting the same night in your head. That I picked up my phone, opened our last email thread, and hovered over his name for a moment. Then I closed it. Some stories don't need an ending, they just fade when they're ready. As I turned off the lights and lay in bed, I could still hear the soft echo of his voice, steady, tired, human. You reminded me of who I used to be. I wondered if he'd ever think of me when it rained again. I knew I would.